he was number 7.
You know, I don't actually give a I hate everyone. I hate everyone ranked in front of me.
So picture this. Two UFC lightweights who seemed like genuine friends just months earlier are about to tear each other apart online in ways that'll shock the entire MMA world. What started as casual backstage conversation between competitors spiraled into one of the nastiest personal feuds we've ever witnessed in combat sports. And when you hear exactly what was said, you'll understand why some lines should never be crossed. Mixed martial arts has always embraced a certain level of mental warfare. Fighters regularly make bold promises about violence, challenge each other's heart, and play psychological games designed to sell fights while getting inside their opponent's head before they even enter that cage. Think about Conor McGregor's legendary mind games. Consider Chael Sonnen's wrestling-style verbal performances. Remember all those press conference explosions that became just as entertaining as the actual fights? This kind of heated exchange has become woven into the sport's DNA. Yet, even in this world where aggressive talk is practically expected, certain boundaries exist. Unspoken rules separate clever promotional banter from truly personal attacks that can inflict damage no physical strike ever could. On January 9, 2026, around 8:12 a.m. GMT, Dan Hooker decided to fire back at Paddy Pimblett's inflammatory remarks. His response crossed a line that many considered even worse than what Pimblett had originally said about his mother. Hooker jumped on X, previously called Twitter, and posted video footage from their friendly November 2025 meeting at UFC Qatar. The same clip that had gone viral before as a perfect example of fighters showing mutual respect, but this time, the message attached was completely different. Those final two words were R.A.P. Ricky, along with dove and tombstone emojis. This transformed ordinary social media drama into something much darker and more unsettling. Hooker was directly mentioning Ricky Turnivik, Pimblett's close friend who had taken his own life on July 21, 2022. This happened just hours before Pimblett had to weigh in for his fight against Jordan Leavitt, the same friend whose death Pimblett had talked about in that emotional post-fight interview. The same tragedy that drove Pimblett's passionate work advocating for men's mental health. When someone dies by suicide, it creates a unique kind of trauma that ripples through entire communities of friends and colleagues who struggle with processing such a devastating loss. For Pimblett, who'd been completely open about how Ricky's death impacted his life and career, seeing his friend's name used in a social media argument must have hit different than any ordinary insult about fighting skills or character. This wasn't just an attack on him as a competitor. It was bringing up grief, loss, and all the work he'd done turning tragedy into something meaningful. Hooker's post racked up about 6,500 likes, 212 shares, 294 comments, and a massive 1.7 million views. The entire MMA world was glued to their screens, already picking sides about who had stepped further over the line in this rapidly escalating war. But Hooker wasn't done yet. Just 17 minutes later at around 8:29 a.m. GMT, he posted again with something more direct and threatening. The phrase on-site carries very specific meaning in this context. It's basically announcing your intention to physically confront someone the moment you see them, with zero discussion or hesitation involved. This wasn't just promotional theater anymore. This was a genuine threat of violence that went way beyond anything related to sport competition. His second post absolutely exploded across the platform, pulling in roughly 18,000 likes, 3076 shares, 4033 comments, and 1.3 million views. What had been social media posturing was now threats of actual real-world violence. For several hours, Pimblett stayed completely quiet while the MMA community went absolutely nuts debating who was more wrong in this catastrophic breakdown. Social media platforms turned into battlefields as fans of each fighter defended their guy while attacking the other side. Comment threads stretched into hundreds of responses filled with anger and accusations. Some people argued that bringing up someone who died by suicide, especially considering Pimblett's advocacy work afterward and how raw that tragedy still was, represented the absolute lowest blow possible, an attack on something so sacred that no provocation could possibly justify crossing that line. They pointed to everything Pimblett had accomplished since Ricky's death: the money raised for mental health organizations, the conversations he'd started about male suicide prevention. Using this tragedy for social media beef showed a level of cruelness that went far beyond normal fighter trash talk. Finally, at roughly 3:02 p.m. GMT, Pimblett broke his silence with a response that both accepted Hooker's challenge while condemning his tactics. In this single message, Pimblett managed to accomplish several things at once. He referenced Hooker's earlier comments about resenting those ranked higher than him, turning that friendly conversation into ammunition for their current war. Pimblett held the number 5 spot in the UFC lightweight rankings at this point, while Hooker had dropped to somewhere around 8 or 9 after his submission loss to Zarukian. He tried to frame his original comment as just a hypothetical joke about grappling skills, which many observers felt seriously downplayed how offensive those remarks actually were. Most importantly, though, he directly called out Hooker for mentioning his deceased friend, labeling it as absolutely rock-bottom behavior. Pimblett's response pulled in about 3,100 likes, 73 shares, 30. After that final exchange, both fighters seemed to go quiet, leaving the MMA community to process this absolutely wild confrontation they'd just witnessed. The timing made this whole situation even more complicated. Pimblett was just 15 days away from the biggest opportunity of his career, an interim UFC lightweight title fight against Justin Gaethje at UFC 324 on January 24, 2026. This represented Pimblett's first real shot at championship gold. Meanwhile, Hooker was set to face Beneil Dariush at UFC 325 on January 31st. Both men had huge professional commitments coming up fast, but neither seemed willing to back down from this personal war. In the brutal theater of mixed martial arts, where athletes regularly beat each other unconscious for millions of people's entertainment, there's still an unwritten code, invisible boundaries that even the most savage competitors instinctively understand should remain untouched. These limits are rarely talked about openly, yet everyone involved in professional fighting recognizes they exist. On January 9, 2026, two of the UFC's most compelling lightweight contenders didn't just step over that line. They completely destroyed it, leaving nothing but burned bridges and the wreckage of what many believed was genuine friendship built through shared competition. This story of Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker's explosive social media war represents one of the most dramatic and deeply personal conflicts to emerge in recent UFC history. A confrontation involving references to dead friends, mothers, and verbal warfare that made regular trash talk look like polite conversation. But to really grasp how massive this breakdown was, we need to examine the complex web of events that led to this catastrophic collapse and understand exactly who these fighters are and what drives them to compete at combat sports' highest level. Paddy, the Baddy Pimblett, stands as one of modern mixed martial arts' most polarizing personalities. A fighter who seems designed to provoke extreme reactions from everyone across the sporting spectrum. Born January 3, 1995 in Liverpool, England, this charismatic Scouser has built an empire on undeniable fighting skills, infectious personality, and willingness to speak his mind regardless of whatever consequences that honesty might bring. At just 31 years old, Pimblett has assembled an impressive professional record of 23 wins against only 3 losses, with submission skills accounting for 10 of those victories, and constantly improving striking, adding another 7 knockout finishes. But maybe more impressive than these statistics is his perfect record inside the UFC's octagon. A flawless 7-0 run that launched him from regional circuit favorite to one of the planet's most discussed fighters. His path to UFC stardom started long before his promotional debut in 2021, stretching back through years of development in European mixed martial arts crucible. As former Cage Warriors featherweight champion, Pimblett dominated the European scene with technical grappling combined with an almost supernatural ability to create excitement wherever he competed. His UFC debut against Luigi Vendramini ended spectacularly with a TKO finish that earned Performance of the Night bonuses, and announced to the MMA world that a new star had landed on the sport's biggest stage. Following victories over Jordan Leavitt, Jared Gordon, Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green, and most significantly Michael Chandler, in 2025, a knockout representing his most impressive achievement so far established Pimblett as a legitimate force in the lightweight division. But Pimblett's career story goes way beyond wins, losses, knockouts, and submissions. In July 2022, after his submission victory over Jordan Leavitt at UFC London, Pimblett revealed to the world that he'd learned about his close friend Ricky's suicide just hours before weigh-ins. In one of UFC history's most emotionally charged post-fight interviews, with tears streaming down his face and voice breaking with grief, Pimblett used his platform to deliver a passionate plea for men's mental health awareness. He declared that a stigma exists in this world preventing men from talking about their feelings and urged anyone considering such a tragic decision to please reach out to anyone, about their struggles. The weight of what Pimblett had carried into that fight was almost impossible for observers to comprehend after watching him perform with apparent confidence and focus. Here was someone who'd learned about his best friend's death hours before needing to make weight for a professional fight, who somehow compartmentalized that crushing grief long enough to step into the octagon and secure a submission victory, then chose to use his moment of triumph advocating for others who might be suffering silently. His emotions' authenticity was undeniable. This wasn't promotional theater, but genuine human vulnerability displayed before millions of viewers. That moment transcended sport entirely, transforming Pimblett from merely a talented fighter into a real advocate for mental health awareness, a cause he's championed consistently since his subsequent work has included funding charities like James's Place in his beloved Liverpool, an organization dedicated to providing professional support to men experiencing suicidal crisis. He's spoken repeatedly in interviews about the importance of breaking down barriers that prevent men from seeking help, about toxic masculinity that convinces men they must suffer in silence, and about his determination to honor Ricky's memory by preventing others from making the same tragic choice. The vulnerability Pimblett displayed in that post-fight interview earned him respect from corners of the sporting world that had previously dismissed him as just a loud-mouthed regional fighter. On the other side of this brewing conflict stands Dan the Hangman Hooker, a 35-year-old New Zealand veteran whose journey through UFC ranks reads like a testament to human resilience, determination, and relentless will to compete at the highest level despite setbacks that would have broken lesser competitors. Born February 13, 1990, in Auckland, Hooker brings extensive experience to every engagement, having accumulated a professional record of 24 victories against 13 defeats throughout his lengthy career. Standing 6 feet tall with an impressive 75-inch reach that allows him to control distance and pick apart opponents from range, Hooker's kickboxing background. He claimed the King in the Ring middleweight championship before transitioning to MMA, makes him a dangerous striker who shared the octagon with virtually every significant lightweight contender of the modern era. Hooker's UFC career, spanning over a decade since his 2014 debut, represents the quintessential journey of a true warrior. While his roughly 14-9 UFC record may not shine with the same undefeated polish as Pimblett's pristine run, the quality of opposition he's faced tells a much more compelling story. His legendary 5-round war with Dustin Poirier in 2020 remains one of the greatest lightweight battles ever witnessed, a brutal display of heart and skill that earned both men eternal respect from the MMA community. Though Hooker ultimately came up short in that contest, the performance demonstrated his willingness to stand and trade with the division's elite, absorbing devastating punishment while continuing to fire back with his own combinations. His split decision victories over Paul Felder, a fight of the night classic that saw both men completely emptied over 5 grueling rounds, and Mateusz Gamrot in 2024 cemented his reputation as someone who refuses to be an easy night for anyone. Training out of the legendary City Kickboxing Gym in Auckland alongside Israel Adesanya and other elite fighters, Hooker has developed striking that combines technical precision with genuine knockout power. His long reach allows him to control distance and pick apart opponents from the outside, while his durability enables him to survive moments when that distance gets breached. Yet his recent submission loss to Arman Tsarukyan at UFC Qatar in November 2025 had exposed ongoing vulnerabilities in his grappling defense, weaknesses that would soon become the subject of cruel mockery from an unexpected source. Before January 2026, the relationship between these two men appeared nothing short of cordial, even friendly if available evidence could be believed. At UFC Qatar in November 2025, where Hooker was competing against Arman Tsarukyan, the two fighters crossed paths backstage during weigh-ins. Pimblett was in Qatar cornering a teammate, and the two lightweights found themselves in proximity during pre-fight festivities. Video footage from that encounter shows them chatting amicably, laughing together, displaying none of the animosity that would soon consume their relationship. The body language was relaxed, conversation appeared genuine, and observers watching the interaction would have had zero reason to suspect these two men harbored any ill will toward each other. While defending Gaethje's age, the American was 37 at the time, Pimblett drew a comparison to Hooker, stating with his characteristic Liverpudlian bluntness that people were calling Justin Gaethje old, but he was only 2 years older than Dan Hooker. Then came the comment that ignited the firestorm, a vulgar, crude remark suggesting that Dan Hooker's grappling abilities were so terrible that he couldn't even defend his own mother in a hypothetical assault scenario. The exact wording was crude enough to mock Hooker's grappling defense, while simultaneously involving his mother in an extremely offensive manner. The clips spread across social media platforms with wildfire velocity, shared and reshared by accounts like Champardies on X, dissected and debated by fans and analysts alike. For many observers, Pimblett's comment represented a significant escalation from typical fight promotion banter. Involving an opponent's mother in such a scenario crossed a line many felt should remain sacred. In the immediate aftermath of this explosive social media confrontation, the UFC and its leadership remained conspicuously silent. Dana White, the promotion's president and typically a reliable source for commentary on fighter controversies, offered no public statements regarding the Pimblett-Hooker feud. This silence could be interpreted several ways. Perhaps the UFC viewed the conflict as a personal matter between two adult competitors, or perhaps they recognized that any official commentary might only add fuel to an already raging fire. Alternatively, the promotion might have been quietly pleased with the attention this beef was generating for two fighters with imminent high-profile fights. The contrast between this sudden hatred and their cordial November 2025 interaction made the feud even more jarring to observers who had witnessed their friendly backstage exchange at UFC Qatar. Hooker's decision to share that footage alongside his initial attack served as pointed commentary on what he perceived as Pimblett's two-faced behavior, friendly in person but disparaging when speaking to media outlets without Hooker present to respond. Media coverage of the incident was extensive, with outlets including MMA Fighting, Low Kick, MMA, BGMN.com, and Sportskeeda, providing detailed breakdowns of the exchange. Most coverage emphasized the shock value of the confrontation while noting its isolated nature. This was a single explosive exchange rather than an ongoing rivalry with deep historical roots. The speed with which the relationship had deteriorated from friendly to nuclear was itself newsworthy. The reaction from the MMA community was predictably divided, with passionate arguments emerging on both sides. Those who sided with Pimblett pointed to the sacredness of his friend's memory and the inappropriateness of weaponizing a suicide for social media engagement. They argued that, regardless of what Pimblett had said about Hooker's mother, however crude or offensive, some subjects should remain completely off-limits, and that Hooker's invocation of Ricky's death revealed a fundamental lack of decency that no provocation could excuse. Supporters of Hooker contended that Pimblett had initiated personal attacks by involving Hooker's mother in such a crude and offensive hypothetical scenario, and that he had no right to claim victim status after making comments designed to humiliate and demean. They argued that Pimblett's subsequent defense of his comments as merely a hypothetical joke demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of why his original statement was so objectionable. The career trajectories of both fighters provide important context for understanding why this conflict erupted with such intensity. Pimblett, at 31 years old with his unblemished 7-0 UFC record, represents the future of the lightweight division. His trajectory has been almost impossibly steep. From regional circuit champion to UFC contender to interim title challenger in just a few short years, his knockout victory over Michael Chandler in 2025 silenced many doubters and established him as a legitimate threat to anyone in the division. Hooker represents something different, the battle-tested veteran whose best days may or may not be behind him. At 35 years old, with a career record that includes both brilliant victories and crushing defeats, Hooker occupies the challenging middle ground between contendership and gatekeeping. His recent loss to Tsarukyan highlighted ongoing vulnerabilities in his grappling defense, the very vulnerabilities that Pimblett chose to mock in his original interview. These divergent career arcs may explain some of the intensity underlying their conflict. Pimblett, ascending rapidly toward a title shot with the confidence of a fighter who has never tasted defeat in the UFC, perhaps felt emboldened to dismiss a veteran he perceived as fading from relevance. The security of his position in the rankings combined with his upcoming title opportunity may have created a sense of invincibility that manifested in reckless trash talk aimed at someone who posed no immediate threat to his career trajectory. Hooker, watching a younger fighter leapfrog him in the rankings while simultaneously mocking his abilities in the most offensive terms imaginable, may have felt a particular sting that motivated his extreme response. The psychology of professional fighting is complex, involving ego, pride, financial pressure, and the knowledge that every performance could be the one that defines or destroys a career. For a veteran like Hooker, seeing a relative newcomer dismiss decades of work with a crude joke about his mother may have triggered something primal, a need to wound as deeply as he had been wounded, regardless of the consequences. No official fight between Pimblett and Hooker has been announced, and given their respective scheduled fights in late January 2026, such a matchup couldn't materialize until spring at the earliest. However, the on-site challenge issued by Hooker and accepted by Pimblett suggests that any future encounter between these fighters could potentially escalate beyond verbal conflict. The UFC may eventually seek to capitalize on this bad blood by booking them against each other. Such a fight would carry significant promotional weight. The brash, young star against the respected veteran, the mental health advocate against the man who invoked his friend's death. The promotional possibilities are endless, even if the ethical implications of profiting from such deeply personal animosity remain troubling. From a matchmaking perspective, a Pimblett-Hooker fight makes considerable sense beyond the narrative elements. Both men compete in the same division, occupy similar positions in the rankings, and possess styles that could produce an entertaining contest. Pimblett's grappling prowess against Hooker's striking would create a classic stylistic clash, while both men's willingness to engage and their histories of producing exciting fights suggest a matchup that would deliver entertainment value, regardless of the personal animosity underlying it. The UFC has demonstrated repeatedly that it views genuine fighter animosity as a promotional asset rather than a problem to be managed. The most successful pay-per-views often feature fighters who genuinely despise each other, whose desire to inflict damage extends beyond professional obligation into personal vendetta. A Pimblett-Hooker fight would fit perfectly into this promotional model, offering the kind of authentic bad blood that cannot be manufactured through press conference theatrics alone. However, the promotion must also consider potential downsides of such a booking. The on-site threats exchanged between both fighters raised legitimate concerns about what might happen at press conferences, weigh-ins, or other promotional events leading up to a potential fight. While controlled confrontations can generate buzz and sell tickets, genuinely hostile encounters can damage the promotion's reputation and create legal liabilities. The line between promotional theater and genuine danger can be difficult to identify, and the UFC would need to carefully manage any future interactions between these two combatants. For now, both fighters must focus on their immediate challenges. Pimblett must channel whatever emotions this conflict has stirred into his preparation for Justin Gaethje, a fight that could establish him as a legitimate champion or expose him as elevated beyond his actual skill level. Hooker must similarly compartmentalize his anger while preparing for Beneil Dariush, a fight that could reignite his title ambitions or continue his slide toward veteran gatekeeper status. The MMA community will be watching both fights with heightened interest, analyzing not just the technical performances but also the psychological states of both combatants. Will this conflict provide Pimblett with extra motivation, an additional chip on his shoulder that fuels a career-best performance against Gaethje, or will it distract him from his preparations, introducing emotional turbulence into a camp that should have been focused entirely on the interim title? Did Hooker's aggressive response suggest a fighter who had lost emotional control, allowing anger to override judgment in ways that might carry over into his performance? Or did it reveal a warrior who refuses to be disrespected, channeling his frustration into focused aggression? These questions will find their answers in the octagon, where the truth of a fighter's character ultimately reveals itself through action rather than words. The cage has a way of stripping away pretense, of exposing both strengths and weaknesses that words can obscure. Both Pimblett and Hooker will face opponents capable of testing every aspect of their preparation, their skill, and their mental fortitude. But regardless of how their upcoming fights unfold, The events of January 9th, 2026 have permanently altered the relationship between Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker. What was once cordial is now hostile. What was once friendly is now bitter enmity. The invocation of a dead friend's memory has ensured that this conflict will carry wounds that may never fully heal. In the brutal world of professional fighting, where physical violence is the currency of success, it's perhaps ironic that the deepest cuts often come from words rather than fists. Pimblett's crude hypothetical about Hooker's mother was undeniably offensive, a gratuitous insult that served no purpose beyond provocation. But Hooker's decision to respond by invoking IRP Ricky, weaponizing a friend's suicide for social media clout, represented a different category of transgression entirely. Whether the MMA world has witnessed the beginning of a prolonged rivalry or merely a single explosive incident remains to be seen. Some fighter beefs burn hot, briefly, before cooling into mutual indifference. Others simmer for years, before being resolved through cage competition. The Pimblett-Hooker conflict could follow either trajectory depending on factors neither fighter fully controls. Whether the UFC chooses to book them against each other, whether they cross paths at future events, and whether time allows for any healing of the wounds inflicted on that fateful January day.